suitcases, life in the backpack, new destination, full tank and a roadmap. My DJ, my best friend by my side, windows rolled down as I put the car in drive. I don't know where we'll go, just know that we've got miles. We've got miles and miles to go.
Hi, I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by my co-host Aaron Spears. Hey, Aaron.
Hello, Dee.
And we're here for another edition of CIFF Speaks, the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival. And we are honored to have with us two of the folks involved in the film Since I've Been Down, the director, co-writer, and co-producer, Gilda Sheppard, and one of the subjects of the film, Tonya Wilson. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much for welcoming us.
And I want to start, Gilda, by asking you what you would say about your film if you were introducing it in front of an audience at the film festival.
Let me use my imagination. Watch out when a filmmaker uses their imagination. You know, I maybe would give a couple of sentences about the narrative of this film and where it started. But I would want to introduce the film by telling the audience why the film is important.
Mm-hmm.
I would say first, hold on to your seats because we are going to experience hope for the future that comes from unexplored places and the most unlikely circumstances. And that these stories will fill you with hope because they come from the people furthest down and that we are able to experience the triumph of the human spirit. From impoverished communities all the way up to prison, but not a pipeline that is slow fade in the gore. A pipeline that springs hope in spite of the culture of punishment. And it also is situated in Tacoma, Washington. But you will see in this film that Tacoma, Washington is a microcosm of communities in the United States and across all the United States, and I dare say the world. What we are doing to our children and what happens to them, the policies spoken from their voice, not another narrative voice coming in to explain the impact of poverty, but that living in the margin could be a place of radical possibility.
I like that. And you sound like the professor that you are.
No, I didn't want to sound like
That's not a bad thing.
Okay, good. As long as I wasn't esoteric.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No. But I did want to spring from that and say, besides teaching at a university, you also teach in the Washington State prison system. And I wanted to ask what motivated you to turn what you were seeing in the prisons into a film?
You know, I always allow my characters to try to facilitate where the stories will be. I was shooting a documentary. I was the director of a documentary in Ghana, West Africa, and I was in a refugee camp. And when the last day of shooting, this one woman comes up to me and she says, "You know, Sis Gilda, the same AK-47 that you see on the streets of Liberia are on your streets, and you need to do something about that." When I came home, I thought there are child soldiers, just like in the Civil War in Liberia, right here in my streets. And so I started teaching at prisons, the men's prisons. Then I went over to the women's prison, and I started to see, my dear friends, how smart, intelligent, and caring that my students who happen to be incarcerated, how they were able to talk about their situation using sociological concepts that I had never been able to do or explain. As they gathered more information about systemic oppression and all those kinds of things, their awareness of policies and the unintended and sometimes intended circumstances that result in throwing away children, I thought it's important for not only me to bear witness to these stories, but also for the world to bear witness to these stories.
And Tonya, you are one of the stories in the film. Did you get connected to Gilda through taking a class in while you were incarcerated?
Well, I got reconnected with Gilda while taking one of her classes, and actually, she was my teacher before I had ever been in prison.
Oh, wow.
Through circumstances of my life and hers, we met again when she was a keynote speaker for a program out at Washington State Correction Center for Women, and she was amazed to see me because I had been her student, and most teachers don't forget their students.
Mm.
And she said, "Oh my God, I have been looking for you." And where she found me was in this correctional facility. And it wasn't that she just found me, she found several of her students, but some were prisoners, some were volunteers, one was the superintendent, one was a therapeutic counselor. And so all these diverse people who happen to have a connection through the correction system intrigued her. And she wanted to know how we had all gotten to where we were at, but she wanted to know about the people on the margins the most. And so I was just happy that she remembered me,
Right.
and that she was interested in what my experience had been while I was there, and from the time that I had left her seminar at Evergreen State. So that's how we connected again.
I wanted to ask Gilda about the way you structured the film, because it really drew me in, starting with the archival footage from Hilltop and Eastside neighborhoods. And since this was your debut feature, I wondered what your process was for deciding how to tell this story.
I've been working on this film for over 12 years. And so I've been working in Tacoma, Washington, as a professor at Evergreen State College, but also in the prisons, right? And so I have a intimacy with the subject and an intimacy with the problem, right? Because of that. James Baldwin once said, "To be an artist is like being a lover. If I love you, I have to show you things that sometimes you refuse to see." All this time, I guess I was not really seeing some of the things that my students have been going through, right? I wanted to do a film that was not just sinner to saint, but because of my intimate relationships with folks in the community, I was given all this archival VHS tapes, old films, in basements of doing rap sessions, and even members of gang organizations throwing up signs and talking about why they were. And so I wanted to show not just the mugshots, but the narratives behind those mugshots. What and how it is not just a person who failed, but a system and a policies that failed. And in order to do that, I wanted to show the people in their context, a historical record, what they attempted to capture and why. And so I needed their voice. And so, yes, it's a trajectory of their lives and their families and from their perspective, which I think is extremely important. But it's also from their imagination, from things that they held dear. And I wanted to juxtaposition that within our society, connected to those policies that Three Strikes Are Out. That yes, there was terrible gang violence, but that's an outcome. And I wanted to show the humanity. I wanted to show folks who's not just these bad people, but I wanted to show how we failed our children. And so I went to the subject and I got all this footage and I wanted to give a historical record of what happened.
Tonya, you were part of that historical record. You grew to be a teenager in the Hilltop neighborhood, and in the film, you talk about feeling trapped and helpless to change the direction that your life was going. I wanted to get a sense of what was happening around you and to you that made you feel that way.
So, on a micro level, crack cocaine had entered our community, and my mom was susceptible to it. My aunts and uncles were susceptible to it, and the community as a whole, which had had a different flavor,
Mm-hmm.
was susceptible to it. The policies that allowed, and there's no judgment with what I'm saying, the policies that allowed Cubans to come to America spread all the way to Washington. Um, when Fidel Castro let all those guys out, like there were certain beliefs culturally that allowed for certain things to flourish, and so without being super dramatic about it, we were sheep to the wolf that came in, and I won't say that wolf was the policies of this country. They had certain objectives that they allowed to perpetuate in the inner cities of America, just like they do today, just like they always have. And the community in which I was raised was susceptible to it. They were vulnerable. They were naive, and the whole culture changed. Like the macro policies that affected every person who claimed the name citizen, and so many people were swept up in it that it just seemed like a normal course of life. But we were just the people who experienced those changes, who experienced the consequences of those policies. And on a micro level, it was just that we had no idea how compelling a culture of drugs and violence and gangs was to any community, any community. And we're seeing it on a larger scale. We're seeing the consequences of it, and it affected from the smallest to the oldest. The profundity of it, like how profound it is just to one life, and the lives that are perpetuated after that one, that are linked to that one, is what I have lived in my own experience, and it's not uncommon. It's not a rarity. It's not as if my story is something that is extraordinary. They've made violence and death a mundanity in the inner cities. Gilda was able to capture that in a really poignant way.
Yeah, I agree with that, because it takes us, Gilda, through the neighborhoods in the time that it was happening, but also talking to the people who are living the aftermath, and also inside the prisons. And I was really curious about the access that you had to prisoners. How did that work? How were you able to seemingly move so freely?
Yes, what you don't see. Well, I followed rules. For one thing, the Department of Correction makes you follow rules. However, just like Tonya said, some of the people who were working in the prison graduated from my school. So I walked in there and I see someone and they say, "Oh, Dr. Sheppard." And I thought, I bet you I can bring a camera in here. But not to manipulate anybody. But you see, I had respect for people also. Okay. I saw this as a prison community. I never called the guards guards. I called them officers. That's their title. Soon they stepped to that. I am not saying that everything was fine. I started bringing their kids books because I'm a professor. At first, I was hug a thug kind of person, But then after a while, I needed to get into this community. I needed for folks to understand that I want to show these stories and all the possibilities. And so I created a really important relational kind of atmosphere with the officers, with the superintendents. I followed DOC protocol. One superintendent who graduated from my school, sometimes all you need is one, said, yeah, you can bring a camera in. And I never tried to manipulate. Never. I treated them with the respect as an outsider coming in. Yes, I had to go through some things that sometimes I had to breathe and all kinds of things. But sometimes if you walking into another community, and also I'm a Black woman, but I'm a Black woman with a PhD. So I use that privilege in a responsible way.
Mm-hmm. And one of the striking things that's part of this film is documenting the education programs led by the Black Prisoners Caucus inside the prisons of Washington State. I wondered, as I was seeing how effective they were, Tonya, I wondered if you were having access to anything like that in the place that you were.
Not until later in my sentence. Mm-hmm. I think that just to dovetail off of what Gilda was just saying, even seeing her former students in a correctional setting, the reason why her presence was so compelling is because of her curiosity, her intellectual curiosity, but also her curiosity on the human scale. She was interested in people. When you meet people at the level of the individual, whether you are a superintendent or a correctional officer or somebody who lives inside of a prison, you are able to engage in a way that someone who is just evaluating a situation is not. Mm-hmm. And so what Gilda isn't telling me, because she is kind of modest, is that she trailblazed for the BPC to come to the women's prison. Because you know that about 12 to 14, maybe 16% now of Washington State prisoners are female. And so all the policies, all of the attention was given to male prisoners. Mm-hmm. And that included the BPC. Like, we didn't have a pride of place with organizations that were given a chance in the male facilities. And so getting in there educationally and being able to document what was going on was a feat in and of itself. But then bringing an organization that talked about the rights of people based on their cultural positionality was a whole different challenge, you know, and not thinking about the BPC as an organization that just thought about the rights of people of color, but that allowed a space for people of all different cultural backgrounds and positionalities to find their commonality in their situation, which was captivity, which is incarceration, which is something that is so situated in trauma. And for somebody to thrive outside of that is where the BPC sits. And so it takes a little bit of a trailblazer to make something like that happen in an environment that is correctional.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and so she worked pretty hard to get that to even happen on a small scale. So we're a little baby fledgling part of the BPC over at the women's prison, but they're passionate and they're inclusive, and they're trying to center leadership with the people at the margins, no matter what their positionality is in the larger society.
Tonya is being modest too. That yes, maybe I did trailblaze to get the BPC there, but Tonya and her peers started an organization called the Women's Village before, and as I, right before I came to the women's prison to teach a class. And that prison where Tonya was, that women's prison, Washington Center, Correctional Center for Women, was the most violent prison in Washington State. But when Tonya and her peers, the prisoner-initiated program, started the Women's Village, let me tell you, violence went down by 50%. So I walked in on a scaffold where the women were ready. They had the red carpet for me to come in. I just opened up the curtains, and they had already constructed the theater, the play. It was amazing. So yes, I used my privilege in a responsible way, but only because I had something to work with. I had something to open a curtain to.
And I think it's so striking that both of these programs, all of these programs that we're talking about, were initiated and led by the prisoners themselves, that the change was coming from inside, not being imposed from the outside. So that said, I want to close with how you hope this film can be used, how you hope Since I've Been Down can perhaps create change.
Well, we sure hope it can. And we think that film as a medium is a very good way to embrace these stories, not capture them, embrace these stories and show them to the world, because this is a narrative, because it exposes the culture of punishment that oftentimes our world is facilitated by. There's a guy, last name Surratt, who said, how we punish says as much about us as who we punish. I hope people can look at themselves and see what role we are playing when we emotionally push certain policies that fail our children. That we not only look at just the terrible statistics of mass incarceration, but that we look at the stories behind it to uncover places where we can improve in institutions, educational institutions, the role of trauma, the role of war. If your parents go off the war and come back, the Vietnam vets, veterans from the Iraqi wars, what happens? What role does trauma play? I want to bring parole back, but not a parole just to bring back and just have it, but a parole that looks at the disparities that happen. Even when an incarcerated person, a prisoner, comes before a parole board and happens to be black or brown, because there's a disproportionality. That yes, we have a clemency kind of way of doing things, that we don't have parole, but we need to bring parole back that looks at disparities, that looks at the racism and the sexism on all people and all genders. We now have 40 years of a perspective on these policies. 3 strikes you're out, those kinds of things, not being able to vote, not having educational classes come into a prison, and people with 7 years or less are the only ones that can take it. We need to spread the model of the Black Prisoners Caucus and teach, so that we can see how we are terrifyingly and beautifully connected, so that we can learn from one another, that we are human beings in this together. I want to change policies. I want people to see their role, be it unintended, in the failings, making our children fail, ambushing them. So I think that film is a beautiful tool to do that.
I do too. It's a powerful statement, and I could go on for much longer than we have talking about it, but I'll just close by saying I am so glad that we had a chance to connect on this film and to give a chance to share it through CIFF Streams for this audience, and I hope others to see it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think it's really, really important. More important than anything you've heard either Gilda or myself say yet. I think there is something that is, and there's no way for me to convey this with the gravity that it really, really deserves. When you send a person to prison, it does something to their spirit that does not wash off or stay behind when they leave out of those barbed wire fences. And I don't think that society, the regular person, a person who has even been hurt by someone who has worked in prison, they don't really understand. And if you are trying to correct or balance issue justice to someone who has violated mores of society, our prison system is not the way to do it. That our prison system is breaking people, and nobody realizes it. And you cannot have a healthy society that is filled with 2 million broken people. It will never change unless people start to see justice in a different way. Criminal justice, social justice, environmental justice, the idea of what justice is has to change in the minds and hearts of the people who live and say that they are a part of the communities of this country. Mm-hmm. It won't be enacted in the way that it's already set up. It is arcane and it is inherently abusive. And until we can recognize that and have that conversation, our society will always, always be broken.
I'm glad you shared that. It's something we need to hear and deal with. Tonya, thank you so much. Gilda, thank you. A great pleasure speaking with both of you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A shout out to my crew, Saman, June. Thank you.
I love you all too as well. Thank you, and God bless.
That was Gilda Sheppard, director, co-writer, and co-producer, and Tonya Wilson, one of the subjects of the film Since I've Been Down. You'll have a chance to see that film on CIFF Streams 44, and you've been hearing about it on CIFF Speaks. I'm Dee Perry.
I'm Aaron Spears.
Thank you for listening.